I was standing in my own driveway, my suitcase still heavy in my right hand, staring at an empty patch of concrete that was completely devoid of the one possession I cherished most in the world. My fully restored, classic 1969 Ford Mustang, a car I had spent 6 years rebuilding from the ground up, was simply gone. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower. Standing on the front porch, arms crossed over her chest with a smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered across her face, was my mother-in-law, Brenna. She held a crisp bank envelope in her hand, tapping it rhythmically against her elbow. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look panicked. She looked victorious. I had just returned from a 4-week overseas business trip, exhausted and jet-lagged. Instead of rest, I was met with a betrayal so profound that my brain refused to process reality. She casually mentioned that she had done us a massive favor by getting rid of that noisy eyesore taking up space, proudly adding, she got a great deal for it. The silence in the room was deafening. My husband stood behind her, staring at his shoes. I could have screamed. I could have flipped the patio table. But I realized something in that exact second. Let me back up a little bit so you can fully understand the sheer magnitude of the mistake this woman had just made. My name is Sarah, and I am 32 years old. I work as a senior systems architect for a major tech firm, a job that requires intense focus, long hours, and occasionally extended travel. I have always been a quiet, methodical person. I do not do drama, I do not raise my voice, and I certainly do not engage in petty family squabbles. My husband, David, is a good man, but he has one fatal flaw. He is absolutely terrified of his mother. Brenda is the kind of woman who thrives on control and manipulation. If she is not the center of attention, or if she does not have the final say in a matter, she will make life a living nightmare for everyone in a 5-mile radius. When David and I got married 5 years ago, I made it very clear that I would not tolerate disrespect. I am completely self-sufficient. I paid for our primary residence entirely on my own before we even met, and the deed is solely in my name. I also happen to own a second, smaller property across town, a cozy 3-bedroom house that I had purchased as an investment. At the time of our wedding, Brenda was going through a messy divorce and claimed she had nowhere to go. Against my better judgment, I offered to let her rent my second property at a fraction of the market value. Looking back, that was my first mistake. For the first couple of years, things were manageable. Brenda kept her distance, mostly because she was too busy enjoying the heavily subsidized lifestyle I was providing her. But gradually, the boundaries began to blur, and the subtle disrespect crept into our daily lives. She would show up at our house unannounced, letting herself in with a spare key David had foolishly given her. I would come home from a grueling 10-hour shift to find my furniture rearranged, my expensive kitchen knives run through the dishwasher, and my personal mail opened. Whenever I confronted her, she would play the victim, weeping about how she was only trying to help her busy daughter-in-law. David would always take her side, pleading with me to just keep the peace because that is just how she is. I remember one specific Thanksgiving where she loudly proclaimed to our entire extended family that my career was just a phase, and that I would eventually settle down and let David be the real provider. She constantly made snide remarks about my money, acting as though my financial success was an insult to her son. Now, you need to understand something about my mother-in-law before I tell you what happened next. She is deeply obsessed with appearances and status. She desperately wants the world to believe she is a wealthy matriarch, when in reality, she relies entirely on my charity to keep a roof over her head. The true catalyst for this entire disaster began about 2 months before my fateful trip. I received a massive promotion at work, coming with a significant bonus and the requirement to spend a month in London overseeing a system migration. I was thrilled. To celebrate, I decided to finally finish the restoration of my Mustang. It was a project my late father and I had started when I was a teenager, and completing it meant everything to me. When the car rolled out of the shop, painted a flawless midnight blue with a pristine white leather interior, it was a masterpiece. Its appraised value was well over $80,000, but to me, it was completely priceless. David knew how much it meant to me. Brenda, however, despised the car. She called it a loud, obnoxious rust bucket that made our driveway look like a mechanic's yard. She demanded that David sell it and use the money to buy her a new luxury SUV, because her sedan was embarrassing. When David told her no, she threw a massive tantrum. I overheard her screaming at him over the phone, telling him that I was a selfish wife who cared more about a stupid piece of metal than her family. She insisted that since we were married, my car was legally half his, and he had every right to liquidate it for his mother's benefit. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, knowing full well that an ironclad prenuptial agreement protected every single one of my assets. When the time came for me to leave for London, I made sure my house was in order. I meticulously covered the Mustang in the garage, disconnected the battery, and locked the garage door manually. I explicitly told David that nobody was to enter the garage while I was away. I kissed him goodbye, hailed a cab to the airport, and focused on my career for the next 4 weeks. I was 12 time zones away, working 14-hour days, completely oblivious to the treachery unfolding in my own home. According to the timeline I pieced together later, Brenda put her plan into motion exactly 3 days after my flight departed. She came over for dinner, armed with a bottle of wine and a fabricated sob story about how her finances were ruined and she might have to declare bankruptcy. She manipulated David flawlessly, crying on his shoulder and convincing him that I was hoarding wealth while his own mother suffered. She told him that selling the car was the only way to save her, promising that they could just tell me it was stolen. When David cowardly refused to participate in a grand theft, she pivoted. She somehow convinced him to just give her the garage key so she could store some old boxes in there. My weak-willed husband handed over the keys to my sanctuary. They thought they had outsmarted me. They had no idea I had installed hidden security cameras in the garage just 2 weeks prior. I discovered the betrayal during my second week in London. I was sitting in my hotel room, sipping a cup of bitter English breakfast tea, scrolling through my phone while the rain pounded against the glass window. A motion detection alert popped up on my screen from the Garage Camera app. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the live feed just in time to see Brenda, accompanied by a strange man holding a clipboard, walking around my uncovered Mustang. The camera clearly captured audio. I watched in absolute horror as my mother-in-law negotiated the sale of my prized possession. She told the buyer that she was the legal owner, that the title was inside, and that she had lost the keys but he could tow it away for $30,000 cash. $30,000 for an $80,000 masterpiece. I could hear the sheer desperation in her voice as she demanded the money immediately. The buyer, clearly a flipper who knew he was getting the steal of the century, agreed on the spot. He brought a flatbed tow truck the very next afternoon. I sat in my luxurious hotel room, 5,000 miles away, watching a grainy live feed of my late father's legacy being dragged out of my driveway. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a cold, sickening hollow feeling that made it hard to breathe. But I did not call the police. I did not call my husband. I just sat there in the dark, watching the feed loop over and over. I could have ended it right then. I could have dialed the local authorities, reported the vehicle stolen, and had Brenda arrested for grand theft auto before the tow truck even reached the city limits. But here is what they didn't know. The title wasn't in the house. The title was locked in a safety deposit box at my bank. Furthermore, my father and I had meticulously hidden a sophisticated GPS tracker deep within the dashboard wiring during the restoration. I knew exactly where the car was going, and I knew that without the real title, the buyer couldn't do a single legal thing with it. If I called the police now, Brenda would cry, David would bail her out, and the family would pressure me to drop the charges to save them from public embarrassment. She would play the victim, claiming she was just a confused older woman who made a desperate mistake. No, a simple arrest was too easy. It lacked poetry. It lacked the absolute devastation necessary to ensure this woman never crossed my path again. I spent the remaining 2 weeks of my London trip operating with laser focus. By day, I crushed my corporate project. By night, I became a silent architect of ruin. I reached out to my personal lawyer, a ruthless shark of an attorney who had drafted my prenuptial agreement. We set up a private video call, and I laid out the exact details of the situation. When I explained what Brenda had done, my lawyer actually laughed out loud. He confirmed what I already suspected. Brenda had forged my signature on a fake bill of sale. We pulled the property records for the house she was living in. The lease agreement she had signed with me explicitly stated that any criminal theft committed against the landlord would result in immediate, unquestionable eviction without the standard 30-day notice. It was an ironclad morality clause I had insisted on, and she had blindly signed it. I instructed my lawyer to draft the eviction papers, but I told him to hold them until I gave the signal. Then, I tracked the Mustang. The GPS showed it was sitting in a dusty warehouse in the neighboring county. The buyer was likely waiting for a clean title or preparing to chop it for parts. I called a private investigator, gave him the location, and had him physically verify the car's condition. It was unharmed. I then arranged for the local sheriff's department to be on standby for a recovery operation, timing it perfectly with my return date. I was carefully stacking the dominoes, ensuring that when I finally pushed the first one over, the entire foundation of Brenda's comfortable, entitled life would collapse in a matter of seconds. I packed my bags for the flight home, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. The storm was coming, and I was holding the lightning. Which brings us back to that sunny afternoon in my driveway. I stood there, staring at Brenda and her smug smile, listening to the hum of the lawnmower. She waved the bank envelope in my face, proudly announcing that she had sold the car to clear her debts and that I should be thanking her for cleaning up the garage. She had the audacity to hand me a check for $5,000, claiming it was my fair share of the sale, keeping $25,000 for herself. My husband, David, looked absolutely terrified. He stood a few feet away, wringing his hands, completely unable to make eye contact with me. He stammered out a weak apology, claiming he didn't know she was going to actually sell it, that he thought she just wanted the space. I looked at the check in my hand. It was written from Brenda's personal account. I didn't tear it up. I folded it neatly and slid it into my pocket. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I looked at Brenda's triumphant face, studying the wrinkles around her eyes and the excessive makeup she wore to hide her insecurities. She truly believed she had won. She believed she had put me in my place, asserted her dominance as the matriarch, and solved her financial woes, all in one brilliant stroke. She was waiting for me to explode, to yell, to cry, so she could call me unstable. I slowly picked up my suitcase, walked past her without saying a single word, and unlocked my front door. I walked straight into the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of iced water, and sat down at the island. Brenda followed me inside, her smug smile faltering just a fraction, confused by my total lack of reaction. David trailed behind her like a lost puppy. She loudly demanded to know why I wasn't thanking her for the generous check. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. I pulled my phone from my purse and placed it on the marble counter. I tapped the screen once, bringing up the live feed from my garage camera. I turned the volume all the way up and pressed play. The kitchen was suddenly filled with the echoing audio of Brenda negotiating the sale, her greedy voice ringing out from the phone speakers. The color instantly drained from Brenda's face. She went pale, her jaw dropping open in sheer terror. David gasped, his eyes darting between me and his mother. But I wasn't finished. I swiped to the next app and displayed the live GPS tracker, showing a blinking red dot at the local impound lot. I looked directly into Brenda's panicked eyes and softly explained that the police had recovered my stolen vehicle 2 hours before my flight landed, and the man she sold it to was currently in police custody for possessing stolen property. The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop, or in this case, the faint crackling of the ice melting inside my water glass. Brenda stood frozen, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the small illuminated screen that was systematically dismantling her entire false reality. The smugness that had radiated from her pores just minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by the stark, humiliating terror of a cornered animal. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Just a dry, raspy wheeze as her brain struggled to comprehend the insurmountable evidence laid out before her. I simply sat there, perfectly still, maintaining eye contact. I watched a single bead of sweat form at her hairline, cutting a path through her heavy foundation as it rolled down her cheek. The flatbed tow truck audio continued to loop faintly from the phone, a persistent reminder of her greed. I did not raise my voice, nor did I demand an apology. I just let the crushing weight of her own actions suffocate the air in the room. David, for his part, looked as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. He took a cautious step backward, physically distancing himself from his mother, his hands nervously trembling as he rubbed the back of his neck. Looking back, that was my first mistake in our marriage, believing that a man who couldn't stand up to his mother would ever be capable of standing up for his wife. He began to stammer, his voice cracking as he frantically tried to stitch together a coherent defense. He pleaded that they didn't know I had cameras, which was perhaps the most pathetic admission of guilt I had ever witnessed. It wasn't that they regretted the betrayal, they solely regretted getting caught. He reached out to touch my shoulder, a desperate attempt to bridge the massive canyon that had just ripped open between us, but I slightly shifted my weight, and his hand fell uselessly back to his side. The sheer cowardice radiating from him was more repulsive than his mother's outright malice. He had handed over the keys to my sanctuary, and now he was trying to pretend his hands were clean. I calmly tapped the screen of my phone, pausing the video, and the sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. I looked at Brenda, my voice low and steady, and explained precisely what had transpired over the last 48 hours. The man she had sold my prized possession to was not some innocent enthusiast. He was a known associate of a local chop shop. When the sheriff's deputy swarmed his warehouse based on my GPS tracking data, he didn't hesitate for a single second to turn state's evidence. To avoid a massive grand theft auto charge, he handed over every piece of documentation Brenda had provided him, including the fraudulent bill of sale bearing a horrific forgery of my signature. He even provided the police with the text messages Brenda had sent him from her personal cell phone, haggling over the price and assuring him the title would be mailed within the week. I watched her knees actually buckle slightly as I relayed this information. She grabbed the edge of the marble island to steady herself, her knuckles turning bone white as the severity of a felony forgery charge finally registered in her mind. But here is what they didn't know about the true extent of my preparation. I had meticulously documented every single piece of financial evidence connecting her to the crime. She immediately launched into a frantic, hysterical defense, her voice pitching up an entire octave as she tried to gaslight her way out of a federal offense. She aggressively pointed her finger at David, screaming that it was all his idea, that he had told her the car was joint property and she was completely within her legal rights to sell it. It was a breathtaking display of maternal betrayal. In less than 3 minutes, she had eagerly thrown her only son under the proverbial bus to save her own skin. David looked horrified, tears welling up in his eyes, as his mother viciously accused him of orchestrating the entire theft. He weakly denied it, but Brenda was already doubling down, weaving a wildly inconsistent narrative about how I was a neglectful wife and she was just trying to secure a financial future for her beloved son. I let them argue. I sat back and watched them tear each other apart, a front-row spectator to the absolute destruction of their toxic bond. I could have stopped them right there, but letting them expose their true colors was a necessary part of the process. Every hateful accusation Brenda hurled at David, and every pathetic, weeping excuse David offered in return, just solidified my resolve. Finally, after they had exhausted themselves, I held up my hand. The room fell silent again, save for David's heavy breathing. I reached into my pocket, slowly extracted the neatly folded $5,000 check she had given me, and placed it flat on the counter next to my phone. I softly explained that by handing me this check, drawn from her personal account, she had just provided the authorities with the final, irrefutable link in a financial chain of evidence. It proved she received the illicit funds and attempted to distribute a fraction of them to the victim to cover up the theft. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a signed confession of wire fraud. Brenda stared at the slip of paper as if it were a live grenade resting on my countertop, The realization that her own arrogant attempt to rub the sale in my face had sealed her legal fate left her completely paralyzed. Now, you need to understand something about the trap I had set. The criminal charges were just the appetizer. The main course was the absolute dismantling of her comfortable lifestyle. Right on cue, precisely as I had arranged with my attorney before my flight departed London, the doorbell rang. It was 3 sharp, echoing chimes that made Brenda physically jump out of her skin. She looked frantically toward the front hallway, her eyes wide with paranoia, likely expecting the police to kick the door off its hinges and drag her away in handcuffs. I slowly stood up from the kitchen island, smoothed the wrinkles from my travel trousers, and walked to the front door with deliberate, unhurried steps. I pulled the heavy oak door open to reveal a sharply dressed process server holding a thick manila folder. He politely asked for Brenda, confirming her full legal name. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the kitchen where she was currently cowering behind my husband. The server marched in, handed the heavy envelope directly to her trembling hands, formally stated that she had been served, and promptly walked out, closing the front door gently behind him. Brenda stared down at the manila envelope, as if it were coated in poison. She looked at David for help, but he was staring vacantly at the floor, completely broken by the reality of the situation. With shaking fingers, she fumbled with the metal clasp and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy stock paper. The bold heading at the very top of the first page read, "Notice of immediate eviction and lease termination." In aggressive, uncompromising black ink, she frantically scanned the first few paragraphs, her lips moving silently as she read the words. I walked back to the kitchen island and calmly recited the exact clause she was reading from memory. Section 4, paragraph B, of her heavily subsidized residential lease agreement, any tenant found engaging in illegal activities, including but not limited to theft, fraud, or property damage directed at the landlord or the landlord's immediate family, will forfeit all tenancy rights immediately, waiving the standard 30-day notice period. I informed her that my lawyer had already filed the paperwork with the county court that very morning, utilizing the police report and her fraudulent bill of sale as indisputable grounds for immediate removal. The room was spinning for her. I could see it in her eyes. The house she lived in, the beautiful 3-bedroom property I had generously provided for her at a massive financial loss to myself, was gone. She looked up at me, her face contorted in a mixture of rage and absolute disbelief. She screamed that I couldn't do this to her, that she was family, and that throwing an older woman out onto the street was a cruel, heartless act that proved I was the monster she always claimed I was. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a cold, empty smile that sent a visible shiver down her spine. I reminded her that family does not steal an $80,000 heirloom, forge a signature to fence it to a criminal chop shop, and then brag about pocketing $25,000 while their victim is thousands of miles away, working to pay for the roof over their head. I told her that she had exactly 48 hours to remove her belongings from my property before the county sheriff arrived to physically drag her and her things to the cub. The countdown had officially started, and there was absolutely nothing David could do to stop it. David finally snapped out of his shock-induced paralysis. He stepped between us, holding his hands up defensively, and practically begged me to reconsider. He cried that 48 hours wasn't enough time to pack a house, that she had no money to rent an apartment, and that the stress of a sudden move would destroy her health. He asked me to show just a tiny shred of mercy, leaning heavily on the vows we had taken at the altar. I stared at him, my expression completely blank, and asked him where his vows were when he handed his mother the keys to my garage. I asked him where his loyalty was when he stood silently by while she sold my late father's legacy for pennies on the dollar. The silence in the room was deafening once again. David swallowed hard, looking down at the marble countertop, unable to muster a single word of defense. I calmly informed him that my mercy was currently sitting in a police impound lot, covered in forensic dusting powder, and that he should be incredibly grateful I wasn't serving him with divorce papers alongside her eviction notice. Yet, Brenda was spiraling into a full panic attack. She fell to her knees, right there in my kitchen, clutching the eviction notice to her chest, and began to sob violently. It wasn't the quiet, dignified crying of someone who realized they had made a terrible mistake. It was the loud, performative wailing of a toddler. She begged me to call my lawyer, promising to give back the $25,000 she had kept, swearing on her life that she would never set foot in my house again if I just let her keep a lease. But I knew the truth. She didn't have the money. In the 3 days since the sale, she had already paid off several massive credit card debts she had been hiding, bought herself expensive jewelry, and booked a luxury cruise for the upcoming winter. I had seen the empty shopping bags in the back of her car when I pulled up in my cab. The money was gone, vanished into the bottomless pit of her vanity. I leaned over the counter, looking down at her pathetic display, and quietly told her that her tears were a currency I no longer accepted. To ensure there was no confusion about the severity of the situation, I pulled a printed copy of her recent bank statement from my purse. Yes, my private investigator had been very thorough. I dropped it on the floor next to her trembling knee. I watched her eyes dart over the highlighted transaction, the high-end boutique purchases, the exorbitant credit card payments, the non-refundable deposit for a Caribbean cruise. She gasped, realizing that her financial privacy had been completely compromised, that I knew exactly how quickly she had squandered my stolen money. I calmly explained that I had already filed a civil suit against her for the full $80,000 appraised value of the vehicle, plus legal fees and emotional distress. Because she had spent the cash, her only remaining assets were her personal belongings, her vehicle, and whatever pathetic pension she was drawing. I promised her, in a voice so calm and even it frightened me, that I would legally pursue every single dime she owned until she was left with nothing but the clothes on her back. I was going to financially ruin her, and it was entirely legal. The sheer gravity of my words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brenda stopped her performative wailing, the sudden silence echoing off the kitchen tiles. She stared up at me, her mascara running in thick, jagged black lines down her cheeks, finally comprehending that there was no emotional manipulation, no guilt trip, and no tantrum that could save her from this. She had spent a lifetime relying on the social contract, the unspoken rule that family will always endure abuse to avoid public scandal. But I was rewriting that contract right in front of her. I watched her eyes dart wildly around my pristine kitchen, searching for an escape route, a loophole, or even a sympathetic glance from. But David remained frozen, staring blankly at the scattered bank statements on the floor. The absolute terror of impending poverty, of losing her meticulously crafted facade of wealth, washed over her like ice water. She slowly pushed herself off the floor, her joints popping, looking 10 years older than she had when I first walked through the front door. David, finally realizing the catastrophic collateral damage of his inaction, tried to step forward once more. He reached for my arm, his voice trembling, as he suggested that we could just sell the rental house and give her the equity to start over. I looked at him, as if he had just sprouted a second head. I calmly reminded him that the rental property belonged to me, purchased entirely with my money before we had even gone on our first date, and that his mother possessed absolutely zero equity in the home she was currently being evicted from. I asked him, in a voice completely stripped of emotion, if he was truly suggesting I reward a woman who committed a felony against me with a massive cash payout. His jaw snapped shut, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. He realized in that agonizing moment that he was standing on the precipice of his own financial ruin. By constantly enabling her toxic behavior, he had driven a wedge into our marriage that was now cracking the entire foundation wide open. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. The cold, unyielding logic of the situation was doing all the screaming for me. I had no intention of spending my first night back in the country, sleeping under the same roof as the people who had conspired to rob me. I smoothly turned on my heel, leaving them standing in the kitchen, and walked up the sweeping hardwood staircase to our master bedroom. I calmly opened my closet, pulled out a small leather duffel bag, and began packing fresh clothes, essential toiletries, and all of my important financial documents. I moved methodically, folding each garment with absolute precision, refusing to let the adrenaline make my hands shake. I could hear frantic, hushed whispering coming from the kitchen below, the sound of two cowards desperately trying to formulate a new plan of attack. I zipped the back closed, slung it over my shoulder, and walked back downstairs. I paused at the front door, looking back at David, who was now sitting on the bottom step with his head buried in his hands. I told him I would be staying at the Four Seasons downtown, that he was strictly forbidden from joining me, and that any attempt to visit my hotel suite would result in an immediate restraining order. I opened the door, stepped out into the warm evening air, and called a private car service, leaving my own home without looking back. The 48-hour down count to Brenda's eviction was a masterclass in frantic, desperate damage control. By the time I checked into my hotel suite and poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, my phone was already vibrating off the nightstand. The flying monkeys had been officially deployed. Brenda, realizing she had zero leverage with me, had immediately called every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the family directory, spinning a wild, hysterical tale of my sudden, unprovoked cruelty. She painted herself as a frail, confused victim who had made an honest mistake trying to clean out a cluttered garage, and portrayed me as a vindictive, heartless monster throwing her onto the street over a simple misunderstanding. The text messages came flooding in rapidly. David's older sister sent a blistering paragraph calling me a psychotic narcissist. An uncle left an aggressive voicemail threatening to come to my office and publicly shame me. It was a fascinating psychological study in how toxic families operate. They protect the abuser at all costs, attacking anyone who dares to set a strict boundary. They thought their collective outrage would intimidate me into backing down. They had no idea I was sitting in a plush bathrobe, sipping Cabernet, and preparing my digital counterstrike. I did not engage in emotional debates or defend my character to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I employed a tactic of absolute, indisputable transparency. I opened the group chat that contained all 26 members of David's extended family, the very same chat where they were currently dragging my name through the mud. I didn't type a single word of defense. I simply uploaded 3 specific files. The first was the high-definition security camera footage of Brenda negotiating the sale with the criminal buyer, her voice crystal clear as she lied about owning the vehicle. The second file was a scanned PDF of the forged bill of sale, perfectly displaying her clumsy attempt at replicating my signature. The third was the official police report confirming the recovery of the stolen vehicle from a known chop shop syndicate. I hit send, watched the progress bar completely upload, and placed my phone face down on the marble nightstand. I didn't need to argue with them. I just needed to hold up a high-definition mirror to the rotting core of their family dynamic. I turned off my notifications, sank into the luxurious hotel pillows, and slept better than I had in a month. When I woke up the next morning and checked my phone, the silence from the extended family was absolutely deafening. The group chat, which had been a relentless war zone of accusations just 12 hours prior, was completely dead. Not a single person had replied to the video, the forged document, or the police report. I checked my direct messages. David's sister, the one who had confidently called me a psychotic narcissist, had silently deleted her aggressive text message, though my phone had already backed them up to the cloud. The uncle who had threatened to come to my office had blocked my number entirely. Confronted with undeniable, high-definition proof of Brenda's felony behavior, their righteous indignation evaporated into thin air. They realized that by blindly defending her, they were officially aligning themselves with a documented criminal. The protective shield of family secrecy had been shattered into a million pieces, leaving Brenda completely isolated on her sinking ship, the blows of sudden safety in her breath that were full of tears. She could no longer play the helpless victim when the entire family had watched her actively orchestrate a grand theft. I smiled to myself, ordered a lavish room service breakfast, and prepared for the next crucial step of my master plan. Later that morning, I took a private car service to the county impound lot on the desolate outskirts of the city. The lot was a depressing expanse of cracked asphalt, surrounded by towering chain-link fences topped with razor wire. I met the lead detective handling my case at the front gate. He was a seasoned, weary-looking man who seemed genuinely impressed by the neat, airtight package of evidence I had handed his department. He walked me past rows of wrecked sedans and abandoned minivans until we reached a highly secure, indoor holding bay. And there she was, my beautiful, classic Mustang. Sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the impound garage, it looked completely out of place. I felt a massive lump form in my throat, a sudden wave of raw emotion crashing over me. My late father and I had spent countless weekends covered in grease, listening to classic rock, bringing this machine back to life. Seeing it sitting in a police lockup because of my mother-in-law's insatiable greed made my blood boil with a fresh, searing intensity. But I took a deep breath, pushing the emotion down, and began a meticulous visual inspection of the vehicle. Thankfully, the criminal buyer hadn't had the time to dismantle anything. He was waiting for the fraudulent title to clear before chopping it for lucrative parts. The midnight blue paint was slightly dusty, and there were a few scuff marks on the driver's side floor mat, but the car was entirely physically intact. The detective handed me the heavy stack of impound release forms, confirming that the vehicle was no longer needed for active evidence since the buyer had fully confessed and formally implicated Brenda. I paid the exorbitant impound fees without blinking an eye, mentally adding the exact dollar amount to the civil lawsuit I was actively preparing to drop on Brenda's lap. I didn't want to risk driving the car back to my compromised home garage, so I had already arranged for a specialized, enclosed transport truck to take the Mustang to a highly secure, climate-controlled storage facility across town. I stood in the dusty lot and watched as my prized possession was carefully loaded up and driven away to absolute safety. A massive weight lifted off my shoulders. The car was secure. Now I could devote my complete and undivided attention to the final destruction of my mother-in-law's comfortable existence. The evening before the eviction deadline, I was sitting in the quiet hotel lobby, sipping sparkling water and reviewing a draft of a preliminary separation agreement my lawyer had expedited. I was legally and emotionally preparing to excise the entire toxic family from my life forever. As I was highlighting a specific clause regarding the division of assets, a familiar, pathetic figure walked through the heavy glass revolving doors of the hotel. It was David. He looked absolutely terrible. His clothes were deeply wrinkled, he hadn't shaved in days, and he had dark, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes. He nervously approached my table in the quiet corner of the lobby, looking exactly like a man walking to his own execution. He asked, in a quiet, broken voice, if he could sit down. I didn't look up for my legal documents. I just kept reading, the silence stretching out awkwardly between us. Finally, I nodded once. He collapsed into the plush armchair across from me, burying his face in his hands. He smelled faintly of cheap whiskey and utter despair. He didn't start with an apology. He started with a confession, realizing that radical honesty was the absolute last card he had left to play. He sat there in the upscale lobby, completely oblivious to the wealthy patrons passing by, and poured out a lifetime of intense manipulation. He explained how Brenda had controlled every aspect of his life since childhood, using crushing guilt and emotional blackmail to ensure he never prioritized anyone above her. He confessed that when she initially demanded the keys to the garage, she had threatened to tell the rest of the family that he was secretly gambling, a complete lie she promised to spread if he didn't blindly comply. He was so terrified of her wrath, so deeply conditioned to appease her, that he sacrificed my trust to save his own reputation from a fabricated smear campaign. He begged for my forgiveness, tears streaming down his face, swearing that he would immediately go to therapy, that he would cut all contact with her, that he would do absolutely anything to save our marriage. I set my pen down and looked at him. I saw a broken, cowardly man who had allowed his paralyzing fear to override his loyalty to his wife. I felt a profound sense of pity, but absolutely zero love. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. A marriage cannot survive on pity alone. I looked him dead in the eyes and calmly explained that his tragic childhood backstory did not excuse his willing participation in a felony against his own life. I told him that I didn't care about his mother's desperate threats because a real partner would have told me about the blackmail instead of handing over the keys to my sanctuary. I slowly slid the heavy manila folder across the polished wooden table. He looked down at it, visibly confused. Before opening the cover, the words, "Preliminary Separation Agreement," were printed boldly at the top of the page. He physically recoiled as if the paper had physically burned him. I told him that I was not his mother, I was not going to manipulate him, and I was not going to accept his empty, desperate promises. I instructed him to take the paperwork to his own attorney, sign it, and have his bags packed and out of my primary residence by the end of the week. I formally informed him that the prenuptial agreement he had mocked 3 years ago was about to become his new reality. He stared at me in stunned silence, realizing his tears had no effect. I stood up, left a $20 bill for my water, and walked to the elevators.